President Bola Tinubu has written to the Senate seeking approval for a fresh 1.15 trillion naira borrowing from the domestic debt market to finance the deficit in the 2025 budget. Now, the president's request was contained in a letter read yesterday by Senate President Godswill Akpabio during plenary. According to the president, the proposed borrowing was aimed at bridging the funding gap and ensuring full implementation of the government programs and projects outlined in the 2025 fiscal plan. In the letter, Tinubu stated that the loan request was in line with the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007, which mandates National Assembly approval for all new borrowings by the federal government. While Nigeria's banking sector grapples in the throes of the greatest transition in 20 years, the Central Bank of Nigeria set a March 2026 ultimatum for the banks to meet new steep capital requirements. The competitive landscape is in flux as industry titans like Access Holdings and Zenith Bank touched the 500 billion naira bar for international operations. A compelling story unfolds amongst lenders with their eyes only on the national scale. Well, joining me now to discuss this in more detail is Jose K. Jose, who is first Vice President, Association of Corporate and Marketing Communications Professionals of Banks. Good morning to you, Jose.
Good morning.
Most welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Well, let's begin with your assessment of the CBN's recapitalization drive and its impact on the overall stability and competitiveness of the banking sector.
Okay, so talking historically, it was 20 years ago that we had the last recapitalization of the banking industry. And so it is very, very opportune that at this time we are having another recapitalization exercise, taking into consideration the extension to which the industry has gone, what needs to be done with building the economy, So it is very, very important that at this time we are having another set of consolidation in the industry. It provides the vistas for the banking industry to get into big ticket transactions and what have you, So it's very much in order.
So you welcome this?
Absolutely, absolutely.
For the good of it, as you've mentioned as well. Now, with banks exploring, rights issues, public offers and retained earnings, of course, to meet this new capital thresholds, what should we put into consideration when evaluating the effectiveness of this new development?
So there are a couple of gamuts to look at. What are the extensions to which our banks are operating at this time? If you look at the transitions that had happened over the years, it's like 20 years ago that we had the last recapitalization of the banks. So It is very much opportune that at this time we are going to be recapitalizing the banks. It provides the opportunity to be able to engage in big ticket activities. Unlike previously when you had to go to look for offshore support, of international banks to be able to engage in certain kind of transactions. By the time you upscale with regards to the capital base of the banks, especially the international banks in our midst, you'd be able to have the capacity to operate properly.
Right. I mean, it's great in terms of knowing what the immediate effects, but let's look at the short and medium-term effects in terms of this recapitalization. What should we expect this to have on lending rates and the overall banking sector consolidation in Nigeria?
So obviously, as we consolidate the industry, you would have a situation where the local banks are able to play very consecutively in the international banking space, and you would have the opportunity for local banks, as it were, Although, really and truly, what we are international banks because we operate both in Nigeria and mostly across the West African sub-region. And we need to be reminded that it was 20 years ago when we had the last recapitalization of banks that provided opportunity for banks across the country to get into the sub-region, And I believe very strongly that with the recapitalization that is taking place now, that is going to be ending in the first quarter of next year, it will provide the opportunity, it will provide the vistas for the banks to even expand beyond the West African sub-region, and into other African countries. And of course, it will provide opportunities for our banks to play globally. As you already know, we have a couple of banks that are that have subsidiaries internationally, especially in the United Kingdom. So I believe very strongly that the recapitalization process will yield the opportunity for our banks to be able to play internationally much more than we are playing right now.
So you're speaking of the overall multiplier effect here as well.
Absolutely.
Right, but we can't have this conversation without talking about the smaller banks. Of course, we do know that they are currently facing the pressure to meet those capital requirements. So what criteria would you possibly use to look at potential merger acquisition targets within the sector?
Okay, so incidentally, I smile because I have been here over the years, So 20 years ago, I remember vividly that some of the smaller banks, especially merchant banks, had to segue back and join back the parent companies, But the most interesting thing about the current vistas is that there are different tranches. So everybody is not expected to play at the same levels. And so you have a situation where there is a tranching system, from the international banks to the national banks to merchant banks, and to the so-called Islamic banks, So we believe very strongly that very wisely the Central Bank of Nigeria has graduated the capital basis for the various banks, from international banks to regional banks to the Islamic banks, such that there is the opportunity to segue the process for your capital raise, and if for whatever reason you're unable to raise the capital, then you should be able to merge. And there is nothing wrong with merging, really.
Right, absolutely. Certainly there is. I wish we had so much more time to get into this in more detail, but Ose, many thanks for your great submissions. We have to continue this conversation another time.